All right. Now we are learning the unit circle. First, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever. The time you guys on. Well, let's see how we know the unit circle. Well, unit circle, we understand there's actually understanding, circle, and what circle means. It means that go in this direction, all right, and go in that direction. This is first quadrant, this is second quadrant, this is third quadrant, and this is IV or a fourth quadrant. All right. Um, this is the first thing that we need to know about unit circle. Go in this direction, it means that the y, or basically the sine, is 0, but the cosine, I'm talking about, go in this direction, it means that the the y, or the sine, is basically 0, and the cosine is 1. Go in that direction, it means that the sine is 0, but the cosine is -1. All right. Go in this direction, it means that let me just write it. It means that the cosine is 0 and the sine is 1. Go in this direction, it means that the cosine is 0, but the sine is -1. So what we understand is the unit circle is basically the distance between 1 and -1, both direction, in the y direction and the x direction. All right. Let's do another thing. What we need to know, but yeah. When I say the cosine equals 0 or whatever, cosine equals basically the x-axis. So the sine equals the y-axis. All right. So, and this is the basics of the unit circle. All right. The angles. All right. So knowing the angles, we understand that it's basically like this. All right. This is basically the first quadrant. All right. So this is the first quadrant. What? This is the first quadrant, and basically starting by 30 degrees. All right. And 30 degrees basically square root of 3. Basically 30 degree, 45 degree, going to 60 degree, and then end up in 90 degree. All right. So when we say 30 degree, all right, so 30 degrees in the first quadrant equals to what? Equals to square root of root 3 over 2, which is the cosine, and then half. All right. 45 degrees equals both root 2 over 2 and root 2 over 2 for the y-axis. 60 degrees equals the opposite of this one, basically the opposite. So it's half for the cosine and root 3 over 2 for the sine. All right. And 90 degree equals basically 0 for the cosine and 1 for the y. All right. So yeah, this is basically how we need to know. This is the basics. All right. So understanding this quadrant. So we now understand. Wait a minute. I didn't. Yeah. So now we understand this quadrant. All right. So first quadrant, we understand it. What about the second quadrant? It goes through the same stuff. All right. But since the cosine is negative, this is basically the negative, and that is basically positive. All right. So wait a minute. Let me write in a better direction. This is the positive, and this is the negative. All right. Here we understand this. Yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah. This is the positive. This is the negative. Cosine on the second quadrant and the third quadrant is basically negative. All right. The cosine on the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant is basically positive. All right. So now we need to understand the second quadrant. All right. So now we are talking about the second quadrant. What is the second quadrant? All right. I mean this one. So wait a minute. So now we are talking about the second quadrant. All right. 30 degrees, or basically going to 30 degrees. All right. So it's basically 180 degrees minus 30 degrees. We're talking about 150 degree. All right. And what does 150 degree equals? All right. So yeah. So basically, we want to know this. All right. This is 150 degree. What is 150 degree? Well, what we understand, wait a minute. Yeah. Well, what we understand about the second quadrant is that it basically has the y-axis. We understand that the y-axis is going up because it's a sine, so it's still positive, all right? And the x-axis is basically negative. So we're gonna have the same answers as the quadrant one, but with negative cosine. All right. So negative x-axis. So basically, if 30 degree, which is equivalent to 150 degree, 150 degree on the second axis, that's the first axis. Basically, 150 degrees equals to negative root 3 over 2, and half still is opposite. All right. And now we are talking about going this side. All right. Now we are talking about this. Oh, why is it? All right. Now wait a minute. Now we are talking about. So we finished talking about 150 degree. Now we are talking about the 45 degree or the 135 degree. How we get to 135 degree? Well, 180 degrees minus 45 degrees equals 135 degrees. And I'm gonna show you how do we get these numbers. All right. So what does 135 degree means? Well, we understand that 45 degrees equals to root 2 over 2, and basically root 2 over 2 for the y-axis as well, or the sine. So what do we know? What do we notice about the 135 degree? Well, 135 degree is in the second quadrant, which means that the cosine is definitely going to be negative. So we're going to have the same answers, but different signs for the cosine. All right, so it's a negative root 2 over 2. Sorry for not writing. The board is pretty small. So yeah, 135 equals degree equals negative root 2 over 2 and positive root 2 over 2. All right, that's for the 45 degree. What about the 60 degree? Well, how do we know what 60 degree means? It's 180 right degrees minus 60 degree, so it's equivalent to 120 degree on the second quadrant, which means that the axis is basically going to be the we're gonna have opposite. This is gonna be the opposite of the 30 degrees of the second quadrant. So basically, of the first quadrant, but different signs for the cosine or the x-axis. So basically it's gonna be negative half and positive root 3 over 2. All right. Yeah. So now we get 60 degrees. Now we need to understand what's 180 degree. Well, 180 degree, we understand that the cosine is negative, so it's basically negative 1, and it's not moving, so the sine is 0. How do we know that a sine is 0? We'll basically think about it. Circle, and going from here, well, does the y actually going up? No, stayed constant. So does the x-axis going up, or does the x-axis move to the left? All right. Well, yes. So it's basically negative 1, 0. All right. Now let's talk about the third quadrant. Well, third quadrant is basically all negative. All right, and we're talking about 270 degrees. It's basically 270. So we understand that the entire circle is 360. All right, 360 degrees, and that's 270 degrees. All right. So how do we know the third quadrant? Well, basically 270 minus 270 minus 30 degrees. Or no. Let's just do it. All right. It's basically so it's 180 degrees in here, right? If we add 30 degrees, what's gonna get? So it's 210 degrees. So it's basically 210 degrees. What about the 210 degrees? It's gonna have all negative root 3 over 2, and the y-axis is basically negative half. All right. Now this is basically the 30 degree of the third quadrant, which is equivalent to 210 on the third quadrant. Well, what does that mean? Basically, when we talk about the unit circle, all right, we're talking about this one, all right? It is equivalent to this one, all right? Which is equivalent to this one, all right? Which is equivalent to this one. Basically, if we put absolute value through the answer, it's gonna have the same answer, all right? So yeah. So what about, so we know that this one is basically what? Negative root 3, positive root 3 over 2. Wait a minute. So root 3 over 2 and half. And we know that one is negative root 3 over 2 and half. So what's this one? This one is equivalent to, it's the 210 degrees. So this one is equivalent to all negatives because the y-axis is going down and the x-axis is going to the left. So what does that mean? It's going to be negative root 3 over 2. So wait a minute. Negative root 3 over 2 and negative half. All right. Now let's talk about the 45 degree, which is equivalent to 225 degree. Why is 225? Well, 180 plus 45 degrees equivalent to 225 degree, which then it holds a negative root 2 over 2 and negative root 2 over 2 for the y-axis as well. All right, and that's basically this one. All right, that's basically, wait a minute, so that's basically, this one is 210, this one is 225, this one is 180 plus 60, so this one is 224, and that one is 270, and that one is 270. All right, so yeah, that 225 is already answered. So now we're talking about the 60 degrees equivalent of that. So 180 plus 60 degrees, which is equivalent to 25 degree. So that will hold negative half negative root 3 over 2. All right, that's for this one. What about 270 degrees? 270 degrees. Well, it's basically the opposite of 90 degree. What does that mean? 270 degrees equivalent to basically 180 degrees plus 90 degrees. That's why we say the first quadrant is the basic for all the quadrants. That's how we know all the quadrants. It's equivalent to 270 degrees, and that's basically the opposite. So 0, -1, because the y-axis is going down. All right. Now we understand the first. Now we understand. Now we understand. Oh, wait a minute. Now we understand the first, the second, the third. What about the IV? All right. Now we need to understand the IV. All right. Now let's understand the IV. All right. So now 270 plus things. All right. What does that mean? Actually, no. Actually, 360 minus things. All right. So when we need to understand 30 degrees of that section, how do we understand? Well, 360 minus 30 degrees. All right. It's equivalent to 330 degree. All right. What does that mean? We are looking for this one. We are looking for this one, which is 330 degree. All right. And we understand that what? Wait a minute. We understand that the y-axis is going up, but they're going down, but the cosine of the x-axis is going to the right. That means it's positive. All right. So how do you understand that? Well, 330 degrees equals to positive root 3 over 2 and negative half, because the y-axis is negative. What about understanding the 45 degrees? Well, that's like 360 minus 45 is equivalent to 315, which is 315, which is degrees. All right, so 315 degrees. How do we understand that? Well, it's basically, the cosine is positive, so it's a root 2 over 2, and the y-axis is negative, so the sine is negative, and it's a negative root 2 over 2. All right. What about, so now we understand what? Now we understand this one, wait a minute, no. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one, and this one, and this one, and let's see, 30, 45, 60, this one, and we understand 30, and we understand 45, which is equivalent to 315, and the 30 is equivalent to 330. Now we need to understand 60 and 360, all right? So, yeah. How to understand 60 is basically 360 degrees minus 60 degrees, which is equivalent to 300 degrees, and that's its equivalent to half, because the cosine is positive, and negative root 3 over 2, because the sine is negative, or the y-axis is negative. All right. Now 360 is basically the opposite of 180. Why? We'll just think about it. So going to this direction, going to that direction, we don't understand it's a negative 1, 0. So going to that direction is basically 1, 0. All right. Yeah, that's the unit circle. We understand it. But what is a trick to understand the entire unit circle? All right. Just know that when we're speaking about 30 degrees, we're speaking about the root 3 over 2 being on the x-axis and half being in the y-axis. So, right, when we speak about the 45 degrees, we understand that both is going to be root 2 over 2. When we speak about 60 degrees, basically the opposite of the y-axis and the x-axis of the 30 degrees. That means when we speak about 30 degrees, we speak about the half being shifted into the x-axis and the root 3 over 2 being shifted onto the y-axis. All right, now when we speak to the 90 degree, we understand that the cosine is going to stay at 0 because the origin is 0. So when we speak about this one, the origin is basically, we understand, wait a minute. We understand basically the origin is 0. So when we go up, we understand that's basically, yes, the cosine is 0 and the y-axis is 1. And when we go down into 270, we understand that the origin is 0, so that means the x-axis is 0, which is the cosine is 0, and the y-axis, which is the sine, is basically going to be -1. All right, yeah. What about the we understand that, yeah, so we understand that going to 360, we understand that the cosine is basically going to be 1 because the y-axis is not going down, or they go down, so it's a 1, 0, and the cosine is basically shifted to the left. That shifted to the right, that means it's going to the opposite, it's going to the positive, so that's why it's a y, 1, 0. What about if it's going to the 180? All right, 180, and that means it's going to be -1 and 0. All right, so that's it. Well, what's an easier way to find? So once you know the first quadrant, the easier way to understand all the quadrants is basically to subtract the degrees. If we are talking about this, the quadrant 2, we need to subtract 180 into 30 to find this one, and 180 into 45 to find this one, and 180 into 60 to find this one, and etc. All right. Yeah. So when we're talking about the first quadrant, we're talking about both x and y is going to be positive. So the cosine and the sine is going to be positive. We talk about the second quadrant, the cosine is going to be negative, and the sine is going to be positive. We're talking about the third quadrant, both x and the y is going to be negative. That means cosine and sine is going to be negative. When we're talking about the IV or the fourth quadrant, we understand that we understand that the cosine is going to be positive because it's going to the right, and we understand that the sine is going to be negative because it's going down. All right, I hope that helps. If you guys need more help into understanding the unit circle, you can write it in the comment, and I would be glad to help. All right, I hope that helps. That's for, yeah, this, I mean, that unit circle is taught basically in honors algebra 2, or if it's taught in pre-calculus and trig. All right, so if you guys need help in these courses, I'm glad to help. I hope that helps. Check.